Great. Welcome to this meeting of the Educator Excellence Committee. We have a very special panel today. Um, Thanks to the idea from Dr. Johnson Law, who I want to start by thanking as really our board and very much the city's advocate for students, SPED students. And I want to start with this context and then would appreciate if each of you could do a short intro and then allow us to then follow up with questions um, from there. And ideally, if you could keep your introduction to 2 to 3 minutes, beautiful. Um, I generally think that every agency, all of us on this call agree of the importance of the issue generally, right? And so I think for me, the thing that uh, would be most helpful is understanding what's been tried to address the problems and support our students better, what we are currently doing, what the gaps are there in your opinion and your experience, and then what specifically we would need to change to make it better, right? And I think in that last bucket, we can spend a lot of time. There's a lot of different directions we could go, um, but those things would help us tremendously. Just so you all know, we are drafting a resolution that we would want to send over to the agencies, and this will help inform what we're able to put in, both as context and as the ask. Um, and so know that that's what we're working towards and why at least I will be asking the questions that I will be asking on this call, and then would appreciate the chance if we could also follow up with each of you after and then get your help to connect with other folks about this as well. So with that context, if I may turn to you, Maria, would appreciate your intro, and then yeah, would appreciate the chance to really unpack each of those questions in more detail after the introductions.
Um, so my name is Maria Bloyer. I'm Director of Programs and Outreach at Advocates for Justice and Education. We're the district's federally designated parent training and information center. And what that means, practically speaking, is that we receive a little tiny bit of money from the federal government to support families who are navigating the special education process. And part of that means providing technical assistance to LEAs and individual teachers and systems about how to improve services for students with disabilities. Um, I think on a very high level, trying to stay under your 2-minute request there, I think from our perspective, we see a lot of gaps, not only in teacher training and education, which I think are addressable, but also in regulatory infrastructure from the state agency to support successful student outcomes in special education. So I think there are, teacher training capacity education gaps that can be filled. There's a regulatory infrastructure, for a lack of a better term. And part of that regulatory infrastructure, I think, is a real gap around definitions, and not just definitions across sectors, but definitions within sectors just writ large. Like, what is a special education classroom? What does that look like? Who can provide specialized instruction? Who can supervise a non-special educator in providing specialized instruction? I think one space where you might hear a common thread with us and perhaps our colleagues from the WTU and some of the teaching spaces is that right now the district does some of that work through its teacher contracts. And we would argue that's maybe not the best way to do that because it means parents can't participate. We can't enforce those rules. We're putting it on teachers to enforce those rules, and they're in a vulnerable position to do that because they're doing it as employees. And we're asking a teacher, to put their job on the line every time. So that on a really high level, I think kind of flags our concerns. I don't think any of these are things you haven't heard from us before. I know the council's heard it from us before, and I think you've kind of heard those things from us in different settings. This is just kind of the first time maybe it's all been in one spot at one time.
Great. And
Is
I
that
have
helpful?
so many follow-up questions there, Maria, on what's been tried, why, who's opposed, and how we can actually help move it forward. But
Mhm.
um, Teacher Bertocchi, may we uh, pass to you?
Yeah, sure. That sounds great. Thank you so much, Maria. That was beautiful. I'm Sam Bertocchi. I am a first grade special education teacher at Harriet Tubman Elementary School, and I am the vice president of special education for the Washington Teachers Union. Um, when I'm thinking about teacher capacity specifically related to special education, I think we frequently like to address one side of capacity, which is what do teachers know how to do? What can they do? And forgetting the other side, which is what do physics allow to actually happen? What do the laws of space and time allow to be accomplished? And I think that one's a lot more complicated. I have a master's in special education. I'm a national board certified special education teacher. And when I was in a self-contained special education classroom, I can tell you with 100% certainty that my students were not receiving the quantity of specialized instruction described in their IEP. And there's not a lot of other places for me to go for professional development. I don't say that to brag, although maybe I will. I'm pretty good. But I do say that just to say that at some point we have to be honest about what that capacity looks like, specifically for our students with high support needs, low frequency disabilities who are having a different school experience. And I think that's my first 2 minutes. So talk to y'all soon.
Thank you. Tammy?
I'm Tammy Lewis. I am currently the Senior Director of Government Affairs for the DC Charter School Alliance. I am getting over the flu, so I apologize for my rough voice. Um, I think more importantly to this conversation, though, prior to that role, I was the first Assistant Superintendent for Special Ed at Aussie. And in that capacity, alongside Maria and lots of other people here, I had a leadership role in helping the district navigate out of 5 class action lawsuits related to special education that we were involved in at the time. And while I think I'm really proud of all the work we did then, all the work that especially teachers, school leaders, everyone has done since then, um, I am keenly aware of how much more work we have to do. I gave testimony in November, I think it was, at the council. And the second paragraph, I said, we have to face the fact that nearly 90% of students with disabilities in the District of Columbia are not proficient in reading and math right now. 90%. What other category of students would we tolerate those numbers for? Um, and so I want to pick up maybe on some of the themes that Maria and Sam gave. I loved your concept of gaps, Maria. As you were speaking, I wrote down we have a vision gap. I think I would put that at the very top of our list. Um, Me and I think a number of other folks on this call have been at this well more than 20 years, and that 11% number has barely moved in those years. And I think we must have a vision. That's the number one thing I would say. We must come together with a vision for how the world could be different for my child, who is a young woman with autism, who went through public education in DC, both in charter schools and DCPS, and did not have the best time of it, I'll say. And for all the other children that I worked with while she was in school and afterwards. In addition to my role at OSSI, I also worked in 3 separate LEAs and special ed work. So I've done a lot of time in IEP meetings. I've done a lot of time supervising related service providers, the support teams. And I think, we have a tendency to point fingers rather than roll up our sleeves and come together. Um, I think I was so struck by Sam's comment about the laws of physics. I think the other gap that I jotted down as we were talking was a gap in resources. And that's resources in terms of funding, that's resources in terms of people at every level, right? From classroom teachers, aides, super qualified supervisors at every level, um, really well-trained related service providers. So I think more than anything else, what I would share is that we need to come together around developing a real shared vision that addresses all of these known gaps that are well documented across our system.
Thanks. Dominique?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Please, excuse my tardiness. I was trying to switch devices. One wouldn't work, and I had to plug up the other one, so please excuse me. But I am Dominique Moore. I am a former DCPS teacher. I taught for 15 years overall. It was 15 years overall, all in special education. Um, I currently am the community organizer for Empower Ed. I started off as a fellow there in their teacher advocacy program. So I kind of help oversee that now, a few with the other initiatives with Empower Ed, such as community schools, special education. I've been to the school board hearings before to testify a couple times, especially on special education. Some of my experience in the classroom, I've taught self-contained. I've been a co-teacher, resource teacher, briefly served as a special education coordinator as well. So I've kind of sat at this special education thing from a various of lenses. I thank you for the question that you asked. I think that is a very great question. I think it shows some depth and some intentionality about trying to do right by special education. I think sometimes we get into these spaces and it could be a little performative, but I really believe that this body wants to do some good change and infrastructure around special education. So with that being said, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that everyone has said here so far. So I don't want to spend too much time kind of reinventing the wheel in the intro. We can get into the nitty gritty. But infrastructure, definitely teacher capacity, systems and accountability is a big thing. For me, being a previous school teacher, I think the day-to-day operations is very important. I think that that's the root of where our financial problem comes from when we start talking litigation because the infrastructure isn't there. So if the root of the tree isn't catching, then we're going to be wrong every day, all day long. So I think that if we could clean up that piece, not only does it make us a little bit more accountable with some checks and balances, but it should save us some money. Like we look horrible on paper when it comes to special education complaints per capita. And I think one of the things that I heard in the oversight hearing and that I have experienced is that unfortunately it's true. And I don't think it's true because people want to do a disservice to children. I don't think that the infrastructure is set up there. So one of the things that I've asked for in my testimony for SBOE and the council that was very similar was to us have some consistency across the board about a special education coordinator. And I think what that looks like in layman's terms to support, and I'm so over my 2 minutes, I'm gonna wrap this up, to support Maria's point about definitions and what those things look like. I think that having that consistency across the board eases a lot of tension between departments, but that also starts to work towards capacity because in my experience as a special education teacher, and I'm landing this plane, is at one school we had a special education coordinator. At another school we had an LEA. So the vast difference is what those two people hold in their pot, which trickles down to what the teachers hold in their pot. That could mean me scheduling the meeting, me scheduling the testing versus me not having that and just having to worry about the plop and the goals and all of those things, which is still a lot, but a little less on the paperwork side. So that's what I think in real time definitions and infrastructure would look like. To be to this, and then I'm gonna let it go. Another
Yeah.
thing I ask for is I think that somebody on the administrative or leadership team has to be certified in special education. We're losing a lot of how the day looks to be able to support teachers, which supports that infrastructure and definitions again, to be able to do the job that we're asking them to do. And I thank y'all
Yeah.
for your time.
Thank you, Dominique. I actually would love to start there. I think one of the things that would be most helpful for me as someone who, Dr. Johnson Law thinks about this and has been working on this for years. But I think part of what I think is the role of the board is also broader education about to our constituents and kind of bringing in folks to prioritize this. And one of the ways that I think is the best way to do that is, of course, to bring that in to a, like more of a personal understanding of what that actually looks like, right? Because I think once we get into the abstraction of systems, it's harder to do advocacy. So if Sam, Dominique, I think since you're closer to the classroom these days, what I would love is if one of you would be willing to share an example of what this looks like from the student's perspective when it's not done well, right? So that we have just a sense of, what is the how do we describe the problem outside of abstractions, but actually in lived experience?
Sam, if you need a minute, I don't mind jumping in. I might have a few answers. Okay. I think for the student, it looks like work avoidance. I think it looks like manifestations of behavior problems. I think it looks like contributions to our truancy and dropout rate. I think that's what it looks like for students. It's very frustrating to not be able to access the information. You throw that on top of a school doesn't have community school options. You throw
Can,
that on.
can we go even more specific there, actually, Dominique? So I get that impacts those things, right? But I say I'm a student, I walk in, my teacher is not well trained, and how different is my experience in that classroom today relative to what it could be?
So if we're talking about resources, it looks like a teacher being able to provide a paper pencil lesson versus maybe a practical hands-on lesson, maybe some tactile. Our assistive technology needs to look better. If we're talking math, blocks, if we're talking STEM, when people talk about the science budget for them to have resources and materials, I think that's what it starts to look like, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it might be helpful. Oh, go ahead, Sam. I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about the difference, I've always taught young children. First graders are actually the oldest kids I've ever taught. But I'm thinking of one of the big differences I see in experienced special educators who have been really well trained and other teachers when they're trying to support our learners, especially with the more complex cognitive disabilities, is it's the difference between doing more for the student and doing different for the student. And I think that's something that trips up teachers a lot. I get a lot of students, even as young as first grade, who've already picked up a lot of learned helplessness, who think their job, okay, now I copy whatever the teacher wrote. And in my classroom, you're never going to copy anything. My thoughts are by far the least interesting in this room. I would rather you draw, use advanced spelling, like whatever it is, we're not copying. But teachers from really great places of like, I love this kid and I want him to succeed, are basically giving them sentences instead of to fill in missing words, to just copy, or instead of to orally rehearse a few times before writing, to just so much copying. It's so much copying. And I think that's the difference between kind of that I'm going to give you more and I'm going to do more for you. I think like that's one of the biggest gaps I'm seeing.
I'd love if I could follow up with both of you to help craft more of the sort of kind of learn more about the actual experience of students. But I have one of the ways that I've been thinking about this is and I don't this is a hypothetical, right? But um, let's say we pass the resolution that asks for the things that you're asking for in the abstraction that we've been discussing, and Aussie says we already do this. We already do this through our existing trainings and conferences and guidance and existing PD. What I would love help with from this group is to better understand um, where where is the gap specifically, and what is it that is uh, not being done that you know that ought to be. And I'll pick on you, Maria and Tammy first, since the last one. Yeah, thank you.
Well, yes, Aussie is going to say that a lot of this has been done, and some of it has been done through some of their programming around, like the micro credentials, and they're working on this. But I think Dr. Johnson Law has a real life example that I bet will be really helpful. But I do just want to kind of flag that I think two places where we can really see something that we could have Aussie do is to define what a classroom looks like and what a classroom ratio is. How many kids with disabilities can you have in a classroom and call it a general education classroom? Is it okay for it to be 95% students with disabilities? Right? That's a conversation that I think OSSI needs to provide guidance on, and that you can ask OSSI to provide guidance on. I also think one of the things that I think was so important early was this concept of like physics and what do we actually have time for? And I think building in consultation time, we try to train families and train schools to build that into an IEP. But the reality is that, we're not going to get where we need to go in terms of allowing and creating space for general education teachers and special education teachers and paraprofessionals and related service providers to meaningfully collaborate just by building it into IEPs alone, because we are not going to be able to get to every single parent in the district. There ought to be a standard for shared planning time, especially for our kids with inclusionary IEPs, you know, which should be the norm. And I would agree completely, by the way, with Sam's comment about compliance. Compliance is a means to an end, but it's not an end in and of itself. The goal is not compliance. And I'll be quiet now because I think that was a lot.
I'm going to jump on from there and maybe go in a slightly different direction. I'm a little bit worried about what I'm feeling like the goal of this conversation may be. I'm a little taken aback that it seems like we're trying to get to something here on this call that we're going to recommend to agencies. To me, that is not how I would approach this at all. And I say that as someone, who had to lead extremely significant systems change. Maria will back me up here. When I was assistant sup at OSSI, there was no data system.
Yeah.
Folks may have hated Easy IEP, but they hated it even worse when there was no, federal court judges were saying, what do you mean you have no data on anything about how students with disabilities in the district experience anything? What do you mean you can't tell us anything about their overall progress, any compliance data, nothing. We had nothing. We had not a single written policy, not one. Zero, right? So I don't mean to be prideful, but I walked into that gauntlet, and Maria and others and so many teachers had to walk with us through massive system change that I think people now don't realize what had to happen then. And so I would just urge us to treat this the way we would treat, for example, our collective interest in improving mouth outcomes. We didn't have a Zoom and then tell Aussie go do X, Y, or Z. We started with a bunch of people who acknowledged a problem. And what was the first step? We convened a citywide summit of all the people engaged on the issue. We didn't assume that some small collective of people had all the answers. We brought in experts. We took time to look at research, to share ideas, to talk through what was possible, to talk through sequencing, what's first, second, third, fourth. And so that's what I would say to us. If we are serious about this, if we are serious about real change that lifts those numbers out of that 11% category, then what we will do is engage in a multi-year process that begins with a convening with facts and data and research and all the players and we will let that information take us where it will into
Yeah.
solution.
I appreciate that, and I think that that's part of the reason why the historical what has been done in the past to get to where we are would be helpful. And Dr. Johnson Law, I yes, I would see your comment.
May
Would
I just,
love your. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I should have said this. I don't mean to say that there aren't some discrete things that we can get started on. I was, I'm hoping we will get to talk to the specifics around training for general ed teachers and child find.
Mhm.
There are some things that I think we can get going on, but I really want to caution us about our ability to, I think we fail when we try to move too fast and don't consider the bigness of the issues and really get thoughtful about solutions.
Yeah, Dr. Johnson Law, I imagine you have a response there. So if you would.
Yeah, it's a couple things. So number one, I appreciate all of you for coming. I wanted to tell everyone I take full responsibility for bringing this before the board and I stand by it. And one of the reasons I brought this before the board is because one, between the Office of the Ombudsman and the Office of the Student Advocate, which are both under the State Board of Education, the number one issue that they see, or in the top three, but I think for both of them, it's number one. And we talked about this data at a working session a couple weeks ago, not a couple weeks ago, a month or two ago, is special education. That's number one. Number two, between Abria's teachers, as a parent, talking to thousands of families and thousands of teachers, one of the things that just seems to be amiss is, well, this is the special education teacher's job. Well, this kid is giving me problems. I don't understand. Like they're failing and this is a real life example. They're failing. They're failing everything. They could be acting out in class, and I don't understand what's going on. Okay, that's just on the special education team. Like maybe they need to do an evaluation. I don't know what that evaluation is. I don't know what that evaluation is. That's not my job. So I already have enough to do. This is real. This is, I quote, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for this child. And the SPED team just needs to come over here and figure this out. Third of all, I do not think that is the appropriate answer. That is the answer that, unfortunately, that I know folks on this call won't say, but we have heard those stories. I'm not telling you all a strange story. These are stories that happen all of the time. And there are teachers who just don't have the resources or think they need to be special education experts or get a PhD in special education to be able to understand the special education process, to understand the basics of child find and response to intervention. And the basis of just best practices is, well, if they're having trouble writing it down, give them just a basic accommodation and let them talk it out with you. And again, these are just some real life examples as to what's going on.
Yep.
Tammy, to your point in particular, we have to do something. We're not going to sit here and just not do anything as a state board. There's a lot of things we can't do. But there are things that we can say, this is what we believe on as a board. This is what we would like maybe to move on legislation with in regards to the board. If it's something where you all suggest, you know what, OSSI's doing this and this may not be helpful, how do we create some type of pilot program or something to be able to, I don't know, do some type of peer-to-peer teaching modeling or something to the schools on an LEA level or on a school-to-school level or something of that nature. And so I understand this is a big problem. And my mother taught me that, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So this is not fixing the entire problem. I want you to know this is not to fix the entire problem because there are a multitude of problems, as you and I have
I was hoping we would
discussed.
get this done in an hour, Dr. Johnson Law. I would love your take in response to Tammy's proposal of
The task force?
yeah.
Well, I was thinking that. I was like, I do like that. I'm wondering, as she was saying it, I was like, are they gonna say, well, we have SAPSI, right? The State Advisory Panel on Special Education. But again, that is also through OSSI. And again, it may not have, I don't think they have a lot of members on there as well. So again, maybe that is something that needs to go through the program. Do we need to legislate it? Do we need to fund it? And fund it meaning do we need to have a task force and charge them with getting certain data points that maybe folks don't have or something of that nature, to do focus groups with the teachers and with the parents or something of that nature, so that actually that's not a bad idea. And maybe the task force could, first be charged with, okay, well, what exactly do teachers need to be able to do this well? Because again, first things first, it starts with our families, but and again, it starts in conjunction with their teachers. I'm going to give it back to you because
Oh,
I think I'm
so
over
as the
time. I
person who
just
knows the
wanted to give
least about the
context.
subject in this call,
Hmm.
I
Wait,
think
say
one
more.
of the things that I think would help me understand what stage of the work we're at operationally is how much of this is, and Sam, you would know this comparison, of course, I think better than anybody either. How much of this is we know the solution and we're not implementing it because we haven't brought everybody along and it's not coordinated like science of reading, versus we don't really know fully, Tammy, what the best practice in math actually is, and we're all trying to figure it out, right? Where in that spectrum are we when it comes
Yeah.
to this?
It turns out I'm not great at math. I know I'm not supposed to say that out loud. Um, what I would say is it depends, right? Special education is a big and wide topic, right? So, do we know quite a lot about how to effectively serve students with most students with specialized learning disabilities? Yes, a lot of research there, a lot of clarity on what to do. Do we have as much information on how to well serve students with autism? Not so much, right? Now, what about a real world kid who's going to present more likely with some of those and some ADHD, and they're going to bring their lived life experience and the ways in which poverty have affected their life and experience. And all of that's going to show up in Sam's classroom in a very, very young child, right? Do we know the answer on how to serve that child and the one next to them and the one next to them? Not so much, right? Like it's complicated. Do we know a lot of things? Yes, we do. Are there things that we know how to do now that we're not doing? Absolutely. Are we doing a lot of things? Yes. I think we lack seriousness, clarity of vision. I've walked with you in the literacy walk, right? It took a lot to think about what are the key levers. It took a while to figure out what are the key levers. It then took a significant amount of time to think about what's the timeline that's reasonable to implement those key measures. What goes into that? There's training, there's a set, there are a lot of parts to it. And I think that's what I'm getting at here. And in all of my time doing special ed work, inevitably we fall onto the compliance side of life. And we cannot compliance our way out of this problem, right? And so it means listening to classroom teachers about their lived experience. I have never found an educator who didn't want to help children. So we've got to get better. And that's what I mean by a convening. I don't mean just the researchers. I mean, I want a cross section of teachers from the city to talk to us about what's getting in the way. What kinds of training do they need? What kinds of capacity building do they need, right? Likewise, I need their supervisors and the school leaders to talk about the things that are getting in their way, right?
Yeah.
So that we can then think about how to sequence all of those things.
Sam, I love actually not only what you were going to say, but as one educator, one of the answers to that question. But I think zoomed out, Tammy, it makes sense to me, right? What you're proposing, and LaJoy and Ben, I would love to talk more with you about this in terms of where we start. But um, Sam, would appreciate your take on what Tammy just shared, and what I would love to hear what you were going to say, but also, your experience on some of the questions she just asked about what's in the way, and then also your feedback on whether something like a kind of convening would make sense.
I have such good news. That's what I was gonna say. Um, yeah, it's not like I'm sitting over here having like creative ideas. No. I so when I was national board certified, I started the process with my gen ed counterpart. She was working on an early childhood national board certification, which was like ages 3 to 8. That's it. Mine is pre-K 3 through 12th grade plus. So the way we talk about special ed is ridiculous. It's like saying if you don't have a disability, we need to know everything about the age from 36 months to like, what would that be, 96 months? Like pinpoint precision, everything about that. But once they have a disability, which means anything else, you're good from pre-K 3 to 12 plus. Okay, good. Birth through death? What? It's absurd the way we talk about it. And I mentioned that for two reasons. One, because I think Tammy's absolutely right that when we talk about special ed, we often try to make it like one neat, tidy thing. But I also think what that means is it's not the same as the science of reading, where we have a pretty settled research body on what works for most kids. And as a result, I think that like we really have to move on the things that we do know are true. And the things that we do know are true are things like ratios in our classrooms. They're things like what access to professional development teachers, general education, professional development around special education, general education teachers have at all. DCPS has gone all in on math. We love this. Math is great. But it does mean that all of our teachers are going to math PDs, and we're not having a lot of work on how do we make that work for our special ed students or our MLs. Like those are two groups who we act like their math experience is somehow a separate thing when it's not. It just is the thing. But because it is so individualized, I think the things that we can do that would move the needle sooner as opposed to later are determining what professional development needs we have for our general education teachers. The W2 is actually working on this with the Department of Specialized Instruction at DCPS. Right now, it would only be like a DCPS level survey, but we literally want to see like what can you do in this and what can't you do and what do you want to learn how to do so that we can cater PD more effectively in that regard. But then also these places where things are happening like who can provide specialized instruction, that should be something that we can pretty quickly say, this is what guidelines for who can supervise should look like. Like these aren't things that I think we need to meet with researchers to determine best practices. I do think that's why the both and of it really comes together. Because not in my experience at Tubman, we would never, but I do think that we say a paraprofessional is supervised by a special education teacher, and they couldn't pick that special education teacher out of a lineup. Or we do say that they are co-planning, when if you look at their schedule, it's clear that that planning never overlaps. So I think that like really those kinds of definitions are the things that we should be able to advocate on soon.
Thanks.
I just went on a real rant there. Sorry.
I find this super helpful, and I know that the chat is bustling. I would appreciate if we could let Rep. Williams jump in first and then go to you, Dominique, to respond. I saw your hand. And then if folks can answer Robert's question in the chat too at the same time, I'd love to juggle everything at once with the 20 minutes we've got left.
Yeah. Thanks, Rep. Chang. And I'm also getting over the flu, so Tammy, I feel you on that. I bring a practitioner's lens to this too, and because I'm also a teacher. So, and I want to first appreciate, LaJoy for bringing this to light and making sure that we are acting on this. I think there's a variety of really good ideas that I've heard, and I still feel like we need a little bit of structure around how do we move forward, and kind of balancing doing things thoughtfully as while also making sure that we're also doing things urgently. In my experience, I've been in schools. Sam and I actually started teaching together at Two Rivers.
Wow.
And we've been at schools that really value special education, in which co-teaching has been the bread and butter of the school, in which there has been co-planning, in which there's been very structured professional development, along with just like a mindset and culture that all teachers are teachers of all students. Because I think the thing that LaJoy had said around some teachers taking a mindset that they don't need to go quote unquote above and beyond to make sure that all students get an education is a common barrier for ensuring that special education students with special education learning needs receive those supports. Um, and I think with my time, because I do want to throw it back to people, I would just encourage us to continue learning about identifying the things um, and the specific things that we need to know so that we can continue to move the conversation forward. I think this when I originally asked after our last meeting about about to what extent the micro grants are being implemented in DC classrooms, it's abysmal. I mean, we had 41 teachers sign up to be able to voluntarily
Yeah.
take special education training on their own. That's 41 total teachers. So that means that if we are not, requiring this, or we're not including it as part of a school's training, like teachers are not at this moment voluntarily developing that skill set. Now it's good that it exists, but I think it also, my broader point is to get the lay of the land, because as Maria had said, like around the issue of ratios, which is also something that I saw Dr. Henderson wanting to know, like we need to know those things, and also know them at an LEA level so that we can support individual LEAs. I'll
Yeah.
kind of leave it at that. I have a lot more to share with regards to things that I think have been effective, but I think my final thing that I'm curious about is Maria had said looking at the training piece and identifying issues there, but also looking at issues with the regulatory framework. And I think as the state agents, the state board, we can also just have conversations around where we're at with that framework and what needs to potentially be
Mhm.
improved so that we can best serve all students. And when we get back to Maria, I'm curious if you could expand upon that point around the top two things that could help us in that issue, because I do see a lot of schools that are just at a compliance level, and that means that we're not getting to actually serving students based on instruction and really advancing their education.
Yeah, thanks, Rep Williams. I would love to pass to you still, Dominique, and just to add to the now growing list of things that would love your response to. This question that Rep Williams is raising um, comes back to, this seems to be the theme, one of the themes of this call. What you said, Sam, earlier around the laws of physics and time here, right? I think I'd be really curious your take on, if only 41 teachers signed up, right? I'm sure a lot of it is they didn't know that it was offered, but also we've added so much onto the plates of educators. What can we take off of your plates to create room for this, I think, is a big question I've got. Um, and how do we decide that, right? But we can't just keep adding things onto what teachers are asked to do without, I think, creating some room, right? Tell me if you disagree. And I think it. I'd love your take on that, Dominique, and then also would love to hear what you were going to respond to, at this point 20 minutes ago.
That's such a loaded question. I need a second to process the second part, but what I did want to say is, as a collective body that is gathering and convening right now, I definitely agree with Miss Tammy's approach. I think any good teacher would agree that that is kind of the approach to take. I think my position on the matter is that while that is true, I think everybody was saying a both and. I think we have to approach it from a bottom down, top up, whatever that saying is, approach. And I think that is because somebody else said it. There are some small systematic infrastructure changes that we can make that will make things better. And I think we all agree that I think everybody's saying the same thing from a different perspective. So I was like trying to put my empathetic listening on, you know how they say, what I hear you saying is. So I was trying to roll with that. What else was I getting ready to say? Yes, we do need clear definitions around those ratios. What that looks like in classrooms is what somebody would say is poor classroom management from the outside, but from the inside, it is the design of how the classroom was set up. So those ratios and definitions definitely need to be inflated so those classroom demographics are equitable and manageable for everyone. That's just being fair. I'm trying to wrap all of what you said up. For me as a special education teacher, in my experience, I can say still in my 7 years, I don't think I've ever, let's say this, when we switched from Easy IEP to SEDS, I never got a formal training. Like maybe like in-house, you know what I'm saying? And that's okay. But my coordinator was still trying to figure out what that looked like herself. So to Miss Tammy's point, like I don't think that we should suggest to change systems like that because I agree with Sam. Like if we could have kept Easy IEP, we was good right there. We just needed to tailor it. So we hate the switch, honestly. It's this.
I want to say, Maria knows this. Nobody loved Easy IP when we rolled it out, right? Does my heart, this does my heart so well. I was the most hated person in town when we rolled out Easy IP. But I think you mean when you moved to special programs.
Yes.
I will say we guaranteed every user got training for what it's worth when we rolled out Easy IEP. We did do that.
When I started, I went to like a in-person training where I sat on like a desktop computer in a room to be trained
I
on how
might
to
have
use
been there for
SEDS.
what it's worth.
Thank you. Yeah,
Never
the
got to go.
being onboarded for SEDS versus like, hey, here's special program, see you later, kid, was a very different experience.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, yes. I worked in PG County as well, so that's that easy.
So, if I could just translate that a little bit, Alistair, I think you were looking
Yes,
for
thank you.
um, like concrete things to recommend, and Dr. Johnson Law as well. Sorry, I'm not using everybody's well-deserved titles. Um, I think that right there is a recommendation you can make. Ensure that when new systems are rolled out, appropriate and adequate training is provided to all of the end users. Like, you don't think that that would need to be required, but you're hearing right now that there was a transition of the data system that is used to both write IEPs, right? It's literally where you go in and create the IEP for a student. It's where you gather what we call present levels, right? So where you gather the data around what can a student currently do, what are their assets, their skills, what are their deficits that help guide you through determining what interventions are going to help the student. The whole system that teachers, coordinators, everybody up and down the line uses. You're being told that end users do not feel like, I mean, I think I heard people say they got zero training, which is shocking to me, but they certainly seem to be saying they got inadequate training.
Yeah.
How could that be? Right. And I think transpose that with your experience with training for structured literacy.
Mhm. Thank you. I appreciate that. With 10 minutes left, I know Dominic, if I asked a very hard question and I'd love to come back to it. I think
We can follow up outside, but thank you for
okay.
articulating that experience perfectly. Thank you.
There is for me the question of how do we create space for this and for whom? Not in the sort of theoretical world, but in the current world that we live in, where, you know, we every time I think we come to DCPS or OSSI with a recommendation, it is, and I'm part of that, right? Another training for educators. And so, and I think about that for all the things that I agree are important too, right? Like financial literacy, which will likely be in the high school graduation requirements, right? But I think one thing that I'd love to better understand that is, I think, more controversial and as you named, Dominique, is how do we create capacity for this? How do we create space for this, or and for whom, right? And again, not in the theoretical sense where I think we all agree actually that every educator should know this for every student, but operationally, how do we actually make that happen in the current context is my question. And I'd love Sam, Dominique, with your personal experience, if you have any uh, immediate feedback there, uh, and then also Dr. Henderson, if we haven't heard from you yet, if you're available to jump in, would love to hear your thoughts and help us wrap up.
I'm gonna be quick and dirty, just the two things that popped on my head. I do believe that they offered like some asynchronous training at some point, but it was like initially after the rollout. By that point, we had already held 30-day reviews and we were in the thick of it. So I think I can say it took me maybe 2 years to feel really, really solid with it. I mean, you play with it, of course, we got it done, but the transition could have definitely been better. Of course, the asynchronous thing works, but you know what it's like to have somebody to. But the two things, I think I would say create some infrastructure that overlaps in creating that time. I think that looks like also consistency in definitions and creating a solid position across the board so that everybody has this baseline of what everybody's position is. It's almost like a sports team. Everybody plays a position on the board. If everybody's position is constantly changing, it's hard to be good at it. So I hope I'm answering your question. I hope I'm not
Mm-hmm.
being too aloof. Okay, so what it would look like, create a special education position consistently across the board in every school, elementary, middle, high school. Not a LEA, not somebody that you paying a stipend to carry extra work. One solid position that carries a salary so that their job description does not change. Then I think the second thing for me would be like what Miss Tammy said, some type of overhead professional development that gets everybody on the same page. That includes Maria's clear definitions and ratios. Those three big things that are gonna like overlap. You addressing class sizes, you're addressing definitions and infrastructure, and then you're giving people back some of their time.
And Dominique,
Um,
you're talking about aside from the spec coordinator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or whatever agency deems sufficient, whatever we can agree on that is succinct. That's just my, you know.
Tammy, I saw that you may not agree there. If you're willing to either type it out or speak it out or follow up. Yeah.
Just trying to type it out. I'll try to finish, but I just would say there that I think we need to be careful to allow for flexibility and innovation and staffing, right? So I would love for us to focus more on the necessary skills and expertise. Um, and I think there is a world to talk about the limits of human individuals in doing things, right? And, some expectations for various things like resource rooms and what's a gen ed class, what's a special ed class, within reason and within the context of the law and all those sorts of things. But I also think we need to be careful to not stifle innovation. We have a lot of students, and in my experience, they're among the most poorly served in our schools, who have real mixes of strengths and deficits, and they're not one size fits all, and I think the adults aren't either. And so there's no reason why you couldn't have a school that finds a really, really wonderful way to kind of focus really great special ed work amongst their second grade team in a particular way, right? And so that's my point, is that I think I get the need that Dominique is talking about, and I think we all share a sense that there needs to be clarity that there's a certain set of skills and expertise that's needed and available to students. But having that all have to be rigidly in one particular person or role, I think maybe isn't the best way to do it.
Thanks, Dr. Henderson. Uh, are you there to chime in with any thoughts on your side or questions as we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, my head is spinning on a lot of different things that we've talked about so far. But one thing that I had done as my homework for the committee was to look at other states that seem to be having success here. And one that stood out was Louisiana. And I wonder just if anyone has encountered Louisiana or another state that seems to have good interventions that come at the state level to help foster the things that need to happen at the school level.
I haven't done a ton of research on their models, but I do think their actual outcomes for students with disabilities might be less good than ours. So I would just wonder about kind of the effectiveness of those models. But I don't, you may have found some good research that I'm not aware of.
We'd love your help to follow up there to everybody. Sam, if I've seen your hand up, and then I'll close this out.
Okay, thanks. I'm just thinking in terms of just like things we could do as a like government adjacent task force, things you could do. What am I talking about? I'm just some guy who's here. That would be harder to do in the other spaces I get to occupy. And one of those things is real meaningful, like collaboration and mentorship and like peer coaching and training across schools. OSSI offers pretty great professional development, to be honest. And I am fortunate in that my principal will let me go to any professional development at any time. Like she's just like, yeah, I'll put you on the leave calendar. See you later. But I think this is something where pretty short term, we could get a dozen teachers to pilot some sort of mentorship and peer coaching program that could really move people. Because the problem is the expanse of special education that we described before means that we can't train people well through a webinar that happens once. They're going to do the same thing that they do with honestly almost all of our trainings, where we watch it on 2x speed and click to the end and then answer the questions because we can get them right because they're the same every year. And I think that if we want this to be meaningful, we have to start think about like how can we scale it. And I think the best way to do that is to start small with something where we say like, hey, can we get 10 really good special ed teachers to work directly with 10 really good general education teachers for a year, and get them things like a stipend and release time maybe once or twice a month. So nothing like huge on schools, but almost like a during the school day. Because when we talk about the plate, like that's the big thing, right? Like what am I doing? During the school day version of the DC Reading Clinic, where I'm learning from gen ed teachers, they're learning from a special ed teacher, and we can really kind of zoom in that way. Sorry that I just dropped that at 4:59.
No, thank you. And I think those of you who know me know that I like to start and end our meetings on time. So Dominique, I would love if you could follow up with us over email, and if we could follow up with each of you individually as well.
Everybody have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. I learned a ton and appreciate the time on a Thursday evening. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody. Stay warm.
Bye, everybody.
Give me 10 seconds to finish a chat comment for y'all.